ladies and gentlemen. Now we'll come back to the last section of today's talk. It is my great honor today to invite Assistant Professor Saidul from the Division of Sociology. He will be discussing with us on the topic of what is sustainability? Is a sustainable world possible? Professor Islam, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you everybody for coming to this lecture. And today we are going to discuss a very interesting topic. Yeah, I need some kind of click of time. But when I ask you a question, I don't like that. I want you to participate. Okay? So at the very beginning, it's absolutely up to you whether you want to participate or not. When I say sustainability, what actually comes to your mind? Anybody? Any volunteers? May I know how many of you here who hear this term for the first time? Can you raise your hand? Sustainability, you hear for the first time. So meaning that everybody actually heard this word, right? Before, sustainability. But probably you're wondering what we mean by sustainability. Is it environmental sustainability? Is it something to do with economic growth? What sociologists can do, to deal with sustainability, right? A lot of questions you might have. So today we are going to discuss some of these issues. But before that, let us have a little bit of introduction of myself, okay? Yeah, my name is Saidul, as introduced. You can call me Prof. Said. I am a Canadian sociologist with a root in Bangladesh. I used to teach in US before coming to NTU. And before US, I used to teach at York University, Canada, where I did my PhD. So my area is basically environmental sociology as well as international development. And sustainability is one of the central areas in my areas of interest. Okay? And this is something that we're going to explore today. So let's move. My first question, are you here to hear what you want to hear? What I mean by this question is that, this is part of our tendency to always hear those things that can reinforce our belief, right? If we believe certain things, if we have some kind of sympathy or empathy on certain beliefs, then obviously we'll always look for discussion, we'll always look for different opinions that will reinforce my belief. We don't want to hear something which goes against my belief, right? So this is human tendency. Okay? It is because and our belief system, our understanding is a part of so many factors. In sociology, we call it socially constructed. It means our understanding of the world is largely based on external factors. When somebody is born, he or she does not come to this world with a complete knowledge, right? We develop our knowledge through different means, okay, and methods. For example, from school, from media, from interaction with other people, right? This is how our knowledge, our belief, everything is kind of developed, right? So what if whatever we are generating is not true, for example? Let's talk about media, right? You understand that media is sometimes biased, right? Because that media is controlled by some kind of corporate interest, so that they don't want to tell you something which sometimes goes against their interest, right? So largely media might be controlled by some kind of corporate interest, so it may not give us a complete picture, right? But we are developing our understanding, our belief, our personality based on the information that we are getting from media, right? And when we see something continuously castigated in media today, tomorrow, day after tomorrow, and it goes on again and again, then definitely, gradually, we develop certain kinds of understanding, and that becomes a very uncontested in our mind. We increasingly took those stuff as a kind of belief in our mind, right? And later on, when we have developed our belief, if somebody says something else, we don't like it. Is it clear to you? Okay. The reason I am asking this question is this. Let's hear something different and disturbing. And probably you may not see these pictures in the mainstream media, in the mainstream discourse, probably not from the politicians. Okay? So this is what is going on in the world. Okay? So we have different kinds of problems. We know we have so many achievements that we can celebrate, but at the same time, if we look at the entire planet, then we have certain kinds of problems. Okay? And we can categorize these problems like economic problem, social problem, environmental problem, and so on. Okay? So economic and social problems. And one of the central problems is inequalities, poverty. Currently, we have about 7.1 billion people in the whole world. You know, the amount of food that we produce in this world can feed more than 10 billion people. Unfortunately, every single day, there are more than 50,000 people who are dying because of hunger and hunger-related disease. So that means there is something wrong in the whole world system. It's not just, right? Even though we have plenty, but this plenty is not coming down to the general masses. Probably you are blessed with a wonderful country. You have a lot of facilities, a lot of things that you have in this country, which probably many other countries may not have, right? So let us think about the whole planet, as a whole. We need to think about the whole world issue, because if we disconnect Singapore, for example, from the rest of the world, we are facing a lot of problems that may not be solved. And I'm going to come to those points again and again. Look at these pictures. These figures. Okay? The first one, nearly 3.5 billion people live on less than $2 a day. Think about $2 in Singaporean context. If you earn just $2 a day, what does it mean to you? Even you cannot buy lunch with $2. But there are 3.5 billion, almost half of the world population who are living less than $2 a day, right? The gross domestic product of the poorest 48 nations, which is quarter of the world's population, or world's countries, is less than the wealth of the world's 3 richest persons combined. Okay? Think about that. It's crazy, right? We always think about these 3 richest persons of the world. You can see the eulogy in the newspaper. We feel very sometimes empowered to see a guy become billionaire, millionaire. But what about the rest of the world? The rest of the population, right? 3 persons. Of course, this is not a mistake of these 3 persons. Okay, their wealth combined is more than the total population of 48 nations. We can see the growing inequality and gap between rich and poverty, rich and poor people are absolutely disturbing. And this gap is not, that happened before, but this gap is widening every single year within a country and among countries. Then 1 billion children live in poverty. That means 1 in 2 children in the world. And 8 billion people die because they are too poor to stay alive. Too sad. 800 million people go hungry every day. And if you look at these pictures, you see that some people have in abundance. Other people don't have anything to eat. But irony or the paradox, the funny thing is that both are actually dying. One is dying because of having too much food, with obesity and many other disease. The other one is dying because of having no food at all. So this is a kind of very sad, trajectory that we are facing in this world. And if you look at this picture, this is called champagne glass distribution of wealth. Okay, the richest 20%. Last time I was talking about 3%, and now the richest 20% of the whole world, 20% of the population are controlling or owning more than 80% of the resources. And the poorest 20% are having less than 2% of the resources. Again, that shows clearly the gap between rich and poor. Okay? So that is environmental, some kind of economic and social problems, dealing with income gap, poverty, inequality, hunger. And if I bring all other statistics like malnutrition, problems with other issues like disease, then obviously the picture will be even more tragic. Now let us talk about environmental problems. Okay? We know what we mean by environmental problems, right? You hear a lot of words about environment these days. Environment is becoming a very significant issue these days. So when the environment is exploited more than its recycling and regeneration capacity, then the problem occurs. The whole earth, the earth itself the planet has its own capacity to regenerate, right? If we cut forest, probably you'll see after a couple of years, the forest regenerates, right? If we take resources from the Earth's surface or inside the Earth, then definitely there will be a time when it will be automatically regenerated by itself. But the problem occurs when we take too much. The nature has its own regeneration rate. But if we exploit more than the natural regeneration rate, then the problem occurs. For example, if we cut too much forest compared with the replanting of forest, then obviously it will cause deforestation. Okay? So that is happening in the world. The resources that we have to take from the nature are not in abundance. They are absolutely scarce and limited. And now different countries, different people are now on a continuous race to exploit more and more. Okay? And because of that, we are having two kinds of environmental problems. The one is resource depletion. When a resource people value is in short supply, for example, deforestation, right? And pollution, when human action change the ecosystem in an undesirable way. Air pollution, water pollution is, all these are some of the examples. So if we dump waste in the ocean, for example, or toxic chemicals in the ocean, then obviously the ocean is contaminated. And the species living in the ocean, they will eat those contaminated things. And this is how gradually it will come down to our food chain, contaminating our own body itself. And this is how we are getting so many different kinds of disease, including cancer, right? So, whatever we are doing is a kind of counterproductive, right? It is haunting us, bouncing back again and again. And that's why we are having so many different environmental problems. And these are some of the problems. Beyond that, there are many other problems: acid rain, air pollution, smoke and haze. Haze is one of the problems here in Singapore sometimes. And this is not something to do with Singapore alone. It is a very transnational kind of problem. And Singapore has to deal with other countries. So most of the environmental problems do not have any borders. Meaning that if we try to solve those problems within a country framework, it may not be possible. Because America, for example, is responsible for 30% of the global climate change, global warming. But this global warming is not hitting only the United States. That is actually hitting the rest of the world, right? So it's a transnational issue, the cross-national issue, multilateral issue that involves a lot of countries, not just one country. Then deforestation, global warming, greenhouse effect, indoor air pollution, landfill problem, low-level nuclear waste, ozone depletion. We have some kind of ozone layer, and when there is a hole in the ozone layer, the ultraviolet ray from the sun comes directly to the Earth's surface, and this is one of the fundamental reasons for skin cancer. Okay? So that is also another problem. Radiation, sometimes we cannot see it, but it also has a lot of problems. Species extinction, toxic waste dump, deforestation, and so on. And all these are happening in a very rapid rate. Okay? And the problem is that it's the same problem. The trajectory that we are facing, the amount of environmental destruction that we are doing, is the same problem with the same amount of greenhouse gases we are doing, with the same amount of GDP we are having without any additional growth. If we do it for one more century, according to the scientists, this planet will be totally unfit for living. It's a very scary picture. And if you look at these, these are some of the reasons why this is happening. And you can see this is largely some kind of anthropogenic cause. And anthropogenic means the cause by human beings. Of course, some of the causes are related to the natural forces, but mostly we are destroying our own planet. Okay? Sometimes we rationalize, sometimes we don't see it as a problematic, but eventually at the end of the game, the problems are occurring. Think about that. Population is growing, faster than ever. Currently we have 7.1 billion people. Probably it is beyond the capacity of the planet, right? And if every person, and every single citizen of the world wants to have the same kind of consumer habit like a Japanese citizen, then we need to have about 10 other planets. But we have only one. Total GDP. GDP growth is absolutely fine. Okay, that indicates the growth of a nation. But more GDP we are growing, the more environmental impact it has. So it also indicates that growth of GDP means extraction of resources from nature. The more toxic chemicals we are dumping in the ocean, the more air pollution we are doing. Okay? So there is a direct connection between the growth of GDP and the growth of environmental problems. Right? It's a very inconvenient trajectory that we are facing today. Foreign direct investment is of course very good, but again, it involves extraction of more resources. Okay? Then damming of rivers, it also causes a lot of problems. Water use, the more water we are using, again, it is we are extracting resources from the nature. Fertilizer consumption. Okay? After Green Revolution in 1940s, for irrigation and also other kinds of crop, to enhance the yield or productivity, we are using different kinds of toxic, chemicals, pesticides and herbicides, right? And when rain comes, this goes down to the water stream, contaminating the water sources. So that is also creating problems. Urban pollution and the more pressure on resources. Paper consumption. The more paper we are consuming, we are basically using more trees, right? McDonald's restaurants. What's wrong with that? Sometimes we eat McDonald's and we feel really empowered. We think that, wow, we are having American way of life, right? These kind of empowerment we have, right? And every time you go to McDonald's, there's a huge line, right? People are crazy to eat McDonald's. I think it's absolutely okay. But on the other side of the spectrum, what happens? You see the McDonald's is growing very rapidly. Okay? Of course, because of the arrival of fast food industries coming from other parts of the world, the local food system is now increasingly displaced. Right? Number one. And secondly, McDonaldization or McDonald industries also causes a lot of deforestation. How? This is something we call the hamburger connection. It means that these industries are, investing money in other parts of the world, like in Latin America, Brazil, in Ecuador, and these countries, the governments of those countries are clearing out, cutting off their forest, Amazon forest, the largest forest in the world, so they are cutting down those forests to make the beef industry there. So because these, McDonald's or other hamburger industries are responsible for about 25% 29% of the deforestation in Amazon. So when forest is gone, then obviously the biodiversity of the whole world is also gone. Okay? So there is a kind of direct relationship between, these hamburger industries and deforestation somewhere else. So the more hamburger industries, the more deforestation happening somewhere else. We need to make these kind of connections. Okay, this is something that we sociologists actually do. Then transportation of motor vehicles. The more motor vehicles we have, the more global warming or the release of carbon dioxide we are doing. And then the communication, of course, it generates more e-waste. And international tourism, sometimes it takes reclaimed lands from the poor farmers and so on. Okay? And this is another very bleak picture of the whole world. This is something that is going on every single day. Okay? We are consuming 54% of the accessible runoff water on Earth. We are mining more materials from the Earth than the natural erosion of all rivers in the world. And then, every single day we are adding more than 50 million tons of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. Think about that, 50 million tons every single day. Okay? And these carbon dioxides are staying in the atmosphere for about 200 years. And this is one of the central and primary reasons for global warming. Right? The climate is now changing. Right? We have different kinds of new calamities. We have typhoons, hurricanes, floods, tsunami, and all these are largely related to climate change. The weather pattern is now changing, and sea level is rising. So all these are directly linked to climate change. And now we are adding about 50 million tons of carbon dioxide every single day. We are destroying 180 square miles of tropical rainforest every day, creating over 60 square miles of desert. And all these are happening every day. And sadly, we are eliminating about 74 animal and plant species every single day. Okay? So all these are absolutely bleak pictures of the whole planet that we are doing. And adding around 1,400 tons of CFCs. CFCs means chlorofluorocarbons. That is coming from, for example, heating as well as refrigeration and so on. So chlorofluorocarbon is probably the main reason for the ozone layer depletion. And these are some of the impacts you have. The wildlife ecological alternation or destruction, species extinction and loss of biodiversity, stratosphere ozone depletion, global climate change. So these are some of the high-risk ecological problems which are directly related to what we are doing in this world. And then high-risk health problems, indoor air pollution, outdoor air pollution, okay? And then workers' exposure to industrial or harm chemicals, pollution in drinking water, pesticides in food, toxic chemicals in consumer food, and so on. And also in case of Africa, look, the previous slide. In case of Africa, 262 million people were affected by climate disasters in 2004 alone. More than 98% of them in developing countries. Okay, so you can see that if we destroy our climate, then what kind of consequences we can face, right? Next. So we are basically changing our environment. And this is one of the examples that what Americans, for example, are doing or throwing out every day. They are throwing out enough vehicle tires to encircle the planet almost 3 times. Right? Enough aluminium to build the country's entire commercial airline fleet every month. About 2.5 million non-returnable plastic bottles every year. Enough disposable diapers per year, which is lined up to the end, would reach to the moon and back 7 times. And about 1.5 billion pounds of edible food per year. Think about that. People are dying because of hunger, and they are throwing about 1.5 billion pounds of edible food every single year. And enough office paper to build a wall 11 feet high across the country from New York City to San Francisco. So this is just an example of a high consumption society, right? So their society is largely dependent on something we call consumerism or high mass consumption, right? And because of that culture, that is actually draining the resources from the planet's poor people. So what are the global crises so far? We have economic crisis, social crisis, environmental crisis, as well as political crisis. Economic, recently we had Great Depression. Okay, because of that we had a massive amount of unemployment, starting from the United States to the rest of the world. Poverty as well as inequality is growing because of this economic crisis. Social problem, we discussed the growing inequality, poverty, where a tiny fraction of the whole planet's population is controlling almost everything, while the masses are having almost nothing. Environmental problems, we have excessive human consumption, excessive waste, as well as some terrible technologies that are disrupting Earth's climate, reducing the planet's capacity to support life. And political crisis, many countries you see corruption, dictatorship, all kinds of problems. And in many countries you can see that the best democracy that money can buy. Okay? And also on the global surface we see that different countries are competing. There are a lot of political tensions, and we have some kind of collective irresponsibility on the global commons. Global commons means water, air, biodiversity, and so on. So collectively we are destroying these global commons. So the question is, what we are leaving for our future generation? Do you think that eco-catastrophe is inevitable, given the current trajectories? So we have a couple of big questions. Why these are happening? How these are happening? With what effect? Is there any solution? Why do some solutions work? And what can we do? The answer is obviously sustainability. So this is the definition of sustainability. Okay? So because we understand that the whole planet is not as we may perceive our world, right? We can see that everything is working very nicely. There is wonderful order in this world. People are working very nicely. There is equilibrium. Every organ of the society is functioning without any kind of tension. But from this lecture, I just gave you a little sense, just a tip in the iceberg, to tell you some of the problems that we are facing. And those include social problems, environmental problems, economic problems, as well as political problems. Okay? So if we really address these problems, we also understand that these problems are not country specific. Some of these problems are very global, and that's why we need to understand the whole global trajectory, right? Involvement of every single country is absolutely needed, right, to solve some of these problems. Okay? Let's say if Singapore has some kind of control over the carbon dioxide emission, it will not make any kind of difference if other countries don't, right? And that's why every single country or all countries have some kind of common as well as differentiated responsibilities. Okay? And when we talk about all these, we can just boil down everything to something which we call sustainability. Okay, there's a lot of history, there's a huge historical background of sustainability, but I don't want to make you really bored. So let us go directly to previous slide. Let us go directly to sustainability. Okay, and this is the definition, right? Development that meets the need of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Right? So this is, there are many kinds of definitions, but this is probably one of the central or widely accepted definitions of sustainability. Okay? So if we look at this particular definition, there are different things, right? If we are on economic development, social progress, livelihood, livable world, a viable world, environmental responsibility, there are a lot of things we can think of if we look at these diagrams. Okay? So if we crystallize everything to some of the fundamental goals of sustainability, then obviously we can find at least 3 fundamental goals of sustainability. One is economic growth. This sustainable development does not oppose economic growth. We need to have economic growth, no doubt, but we need to make sure that that growth will not destroy the environment forever. Because if a growth can destroy the environment, then the future generation will have nothing, right? So that's why we need to find out some kind of development trajectories or development paths that can protect the environment, not destroy the environment, as well as it will make sure that the fruit of development is not confined in a few and fewer hands. Rather, the fruit of development will be coming down to the general masses. In many countries, the GDP is absolutely great, but that is confined within few hands. Okay? So when you look at this picture of GDP, you will see, wow, what a wonderful development this country has. But that may not indicate the actual development or welfare of the people, right? We need to make sure that the general masses will have some kind of share of that development. So that's why we need to have some kind of social equity principle in sustainable development. So basically we have these 3 fundamental goals of sustainable development: economic growth, environmental protection, and social equity. And this is absolutely challenging, right? And we can see that different international organizations or institutions like United States aid, USAID, Agency for International Development, as well as World Bank, they have incorporated sustainability in their all operations. Okay, there was a time when I was working with World Bank in Washington, D.C., and you can see this picture there. Okay? So there are different theoretical approaches. There are different theoretical approaches to sustainability. Okay, I am just talking only one. And this is, probably you'll find it some kind of, disciplinary journal. For example, ecological modernization. Probably you are hearing for the first time for many of you. But this is one of the approaches that is dealing with sustainable development. So according to this approach, capitalism is flexible enough to embrace a movement in the direction of a sustainable capitalism. They recognize that, this group of people recognize that yes, there are certain problems with current economic paradigm, which is capitalism. Capitalism has created all these different problems, but we can also find out solutions from within. We don't need to go for another society like socialism or communism to solve this problem. We can solve this problem from within. It is because capitalism is very flexible. It can move towards the direction of sustainable development. So the second point they are talking about is that they are neither questioning the existing economic and political arrangements. Okay? So current economic system is fine. We don't need to change the economic system to something which is absolutely new. We don't need to rethink about the political system which is based on democracy. Okay? I think this democracy is still the best system we have. We don't need to address these problems. And also we don't need to go back to the earlier society, like hunting-gathering society, living in the jungles, having a very traditional lifestyle. This is something, called